I walked slowly in the busy hallway of the hospital. There were people on stretchers and wheelchairs being pushed, and sick children with their parents sitting on the side benches. In the crowd, I noticed a lady with blue streaks in her hair. She is undoubtedly Suzanne, I thought to myself, but it makes no sense for Suzanne to be here. I had just called her yesterday and asked her to accompany me, but she had told me that she has a work trip and was flying to New York. I made my way to the woman and tapped her lightly on her shoulder. She turned around and her eyes widened, but she quickly gave me a wide smile and said, "Mom, what a pleasant surprise! What are you doing here?" I should be asking you the same question. Why are you at the hospital, Suzanne? Well, just a general checkup, she replied. I just stared at her, confused. My blood pressure shot up, and I just had to get it checked to be sure. She continued, still smiling. Isn't your insulin treatment done at Hertz Clinic? She asked promptly. Well, they referred me here to a new doctor to change my dosage, which is why I called you yesterday. It's a little far from home, I replied. Oh, well, I didn't know that, she said, looking around her. That's because I didn't mention it. Rob was busy with work and you said you have a trip to New York. I said to her, Yes, I did. It just got canceled today morning, and so I decided to get some tests done for my blood sugar pressure, she stammered. Just as I was about to reply, Suzanne noticed a nurse walking towards us and quickly said, Excuse me, and walked to the nurse. I followed behind her to make sure her test results were normal, but instead I heard the nurse say to her, Well, ma'am, it seems like you're all clear for the abortion. We can also schedule it for tomorrow when No, I can get it done right now, Suzanne replied in a haste. The nurse seemed puzzled, but said softly, Well, I'll get everything ready then. Suzanne turned around and her face went pale, like she had seen a ghost. Mom, I was staring at her with my eyes widened and I said softly, What is all this about? Is everything okay? It was no secret that Suzanne and I didn't get along, but we'd always maintained being cordial. I never believed in interfering in my son's life, but I was concerned for my son and his family. My daughter-in-law was getting an abortion. We didn't even know she was pregnant. The baby, it isn't quite healthy, Its heart is 2 weeks, so the doctor suggested that I get an abortion so it doesn't complicate my health. She replied as if reassuring herself. I and Rob didn't want to tell anyone since it was all so depressing. We didn't want to involve you guys. It was just too sad. I hope you don't mind. She continued. Well, of course not, honey, but I am so sorry. I wish you had told us so we could all be there for you both. I said to her kindly, Where is Rob? I asked her, looking around in hope of spotting him. Oh, he isn't here, she answered plainly. When I looked puzzled, she continued, He had an important meeting at work, and he couldn't get out of it. Either way, Mom, let's just keep this between us. Rob really wanted to keep this private, and this has been so hard for us, I don't want anyone to remind him of all this all over again. I understand. Consider this between us. I still think he should have been here for you. Before she could reply to me, the nurse came back. Miss Suzanne, we are ready for you. I can take you to get you prepped, she said. Suzanne turned to me and gave a tight-lipped smile. Well, Mom, she said, reaching for my hands. I will see you soon. I watched her leave with the nurse and then walked to the doctor's office for my own appointment. My appointment didn't take very long, and as I was leaving the hospital, I saw a small canteen. I decided to wait for Suzanne. It didn't quite sit right with me that Rob wasn't here with her. I sat at the canteen for a while, lost in thought, and then bought some snacks for Suzanne and walked towards the gynecology department. I spotted the nurse who was talking to Suzanne earlier and asked her for directions to the theater where Suzanne was being operated. She gave me directions and I found the operation theater with ease. I sat outside the theater on the benches. It was late afternoon and the only people there were me and the young man in a brown coat. He looked very anxious and kept looking around. I offered him some water, but he just stared at me for a second before he excused himself and left. I watched him walk away swiftly and disappear into the corner. The operation theater's light went off, and a couple of nurses came out with a doctor. The nurse I had met earlier walked to the doctor while giving me a smile. The doctor walked to me and said that I can meet Suzanne in a while when they shift her to the observation ward. I sat down again and waited until a nurse led me to Suzanne's bed in the observation ward. She seemed at peace despite the recent events. She was lying down with her eyes closed when I softly called out to her, "Suzanne." She opened her eyes in a spur. "Mom," she exclaimed. "You're still here? I wanted to make sure you're okay," I said, handing her a packet of crisps and putting a bottle of juice on the side table. "Oh, I am completely fine. Please don't worry about me," she replied. "Well, Rob hasn't come yet. I thought of calling him, but wanted to keep your word." "Oh, thank you. He is on his way. He just texted me, which is why it would be best if you would leave," she answered while opening up the packet of crisps. "Thank you for all of this," she said, looking at the snacks. "No worries. We are family after all. I'll take your leave then. Feel better soon," I said, smiling at her. "Thank you," she called out to me. As I began to walk outside, I saw the same young man with the brown coat talking to the nurse. I nodded at the nurse and left the hospital, feeling a little uneasy. I spent the night in a knot. There was something unnatural about the things at the hospital. I'd raised Rob to be a gentleman. It's uncanny for him to not show up to support his wife at such a time. After much deliberation, I decided to call Rob the next morning and scold him for not being present for his wife. The next morning, I tried to wait a while, but my impatience got the best of me, and I called Rob right after putting my coffee to steam. "Hello, Rob," I said when he picked up the phone. "Good morning, Mom. Is everything all right? Isn't it a little too early?" He replied groggily. "Well, I thought you would be up early to be at the hospital to see Suzanne," I replied. "Suzanne? At the hospital?" he said sharply. "I don't understand. Suzanne is in New York." "I know about the abortion. I met Suzanne by accident yesterday and, well, I am sorry that you too have had to go through that. Why weren't you there yesterday?" "Abortion? Suzanne wasn't even pregnant. Mom, what are you talking about?" he asked, sounding completely shocked. "Well, she had an abortion. She told me the baby's heart was too weak. I'm sorry," I replied slowly. Rob was in disbelief. He had no idea Suzanne was pregnant. I explained everything that I witnessed at the hospital yesterday in detail to him. His reaction to my revelation started making me anxious. He decided to keep a positive mindset and talk to Suzanne before making any harsh judgment. "Perhaps she didn't tell him so that I don't get hurt," he concluded. I decided to accompany him to the hospital so that we could find answers to all our questions. Rob picked me up from my apartment and we drove to the hospital in uncomfortable silence. We walked straight to the gynecology department. I recognized the nurse I had met yesterday and greeted her. Rob was impatient and angry. He wasted no time in questioning the nurse. "Where is Suzanne? Is the abortion done? How did you guys even do all of this without ever consulting the father?" Rob kept making a beeline of questions. "Sir, please calm down. The father has been there at all of the appointments," she answered, glancing at the young man in a brown coat, and continued, "I can't answer so many questions. Patient information is confidential," she said sternly. It all suddenly started to make sense to me. The young man in the brown coat being so anxious and walking away right when he noticed me, Suzanne being so unreasonably nervous around me. I didn't like the answers I was forming in my head, so I decided to keep it to myself. "What? I haven't been present for any appointments, Rob replied, raising his voice. Well, not you. The father, Mr. Gary, has been present. I'm sorry. I have a lot of work. Now, if you'll excuse me. The nurse replied, getting angry. I am the father. I am Suzanne's husband. Who the heck is Mr. Gary? Rob shouted suddenly. The lobby got quiet suddenly and everyone was staring at us. The nurse seemed to have gotten uncomfortable. She pointed at the man in the brown coat. His face was red, and he was staring back at us. That's Mr. Gary. He's the father as mentioned in our forms, she said softly and left. Rob rushed into the observation ward. I followed behind him, and so did the man in the brown coat, Mr. Gary. As soon as he reached Suzanne's bed, she sat upright in shock, unable to find her words. Is it true? Rob asked softly. Rob, it's not what you think, she squeaked back. Is he the father? Have you been cheating on me? Rob asked again, sternly this time, pointing his finger at Mr. Gary. Yes, but please, listen to me. I didn't mean for it to happen, she replied. Tears started streaming down her cheeks. She looked at me and cried out, It's all your fault. You did this. You have been lying to us all this time. Aren't you ashamed of yourself at all? I bit back at her. It just happened once. Rob, look at me. I'm in so much pain. Don't do this right now, she said to Rob, pleading with him. When he didn't reply, she continued. I promise it won't happen again. We are done, Rob said softly. He looked at me and said, Let's go, and walked away. That was the last time we saw Suzanne. They both had a mutual divorce soon after the incident. I guess Suzanne wanted to avoid public scrutiny for what she had done. Suzanne had lied to Rob and me about going on a trip to New York. She was having an affair with one of her subordinates from work, Gary, and had gotten pregnant. Gary and Suzanne had decided to have the baby aborted and hide the whole matter from Rob and Gary's family. No matter how much Suzanne tried to keep the matter hushed, it was impossible. Gary was a young boy, and he couldn't help but gloat about his affair with his boss. Soon, everyone knew the reason behind Rob and Suzanne's divorce. Suzanne and Gary were both fired from their job, as the company didn't allow such relationships between bosses and employees. Ultimately, Suzanne shifted to a different state to get away from the gossip that followed her everywhere she went. As for Rob, he was heartbroken. He had to take a leave from work in order to get his private life together. He started going to therapy and eventually rejoined his work. He seems a lot happier now. He has even planned to take us on a trip to Italy during the Christmas holidays.